What was the creepiest or most paranormal thing that's ever happened to you? Story 1. Creepy for me. I was having a tense conversation with someone that I was close to years ago. The conversation quickly devolved into a passive-aggressive fight that ended with the other person getting in the car and driving away. As I started heading back inside, the other person came back, got out of the car, and started our conversation again. The tone of voice was totally different, and the stance was different, and the feeling in the air was completely off. I don't know how else to explain it. As the conversation progressed, the other person started saying some nasty and mean things that were completely out of character. I said, "This isn't like you, person." They said, "What makes you think that I'm person?" I remember continuing the conversation and talking to the person for a long time, but I don't remember anything specific. I do remember becoming more and more alarmed and knowing something wasn't right. Finally, I told the person to go home. They complied and left. I went back inside and started telling my sibling about the situation when the doorbell rang. Maybe 2 to 3 minutes had passed. It was the person coming back to apologize for the original fight. They had been driving around town for a long time and didn't want to go home, leaving things unresolved. I asked why they had said some of the things from the last conversation, and they looked at me like I was crazy. They had no idea what I was talking about. Totally could have been lying, but that whole situation just felt dark. Scared the hell out of me. Story 2. I was a manager of computer repair for a retailer a couple of years ago. We had a client's computer in the back running various malware and virus scans. I was doing morning paperwork in the back near the computer. This PC had its screensaver on displaying random photos from the My Pictures folder, various family members, children's birthday parties, the usual stuff. Then from of my eye, I swear to God, I saw a picture of a woman from the shoulders up with her throat cut. As soon as I realized what I was making out, I directed my full attention, and it was back to photos of a car show. As their day went on, I, though nothing of it, and proceeded, continue my work, until I was bringing another customer's PC to the back to work on, and again from my peripheral, I could have sworn I saw a bloody body bound in a trunk of a car. At that moment, I began to freak out. I grabbed one of my employees, explained to him the situation. We then sat for 10 minutes and watched this screensaver. It is against company policy to search through the client's personnel files without absolute just cause. We then proceeded to see a photo. 2 bodies in a shallow grave out in the woods, and another photo of a severed hand down in kitchen drawer. I then went and got the general manager and informed him of the situation and had him view this screensaver. We then felt that I would be in everyone's best interest to contact law enforcement. In about 15 minutes later, owner of the computer and another gentleman show up. I proceed to tell him that his computer is not ready and it will be a while. He then informs me that he was called there because someone reported there were some photographs of a grisly murder that we had found. I showed him his computer, and then his partner then begins to laugh at him. Apparently he went against police policy and took some of his work home with him and had never noticed. His work photos were being used as a screensaver. Story 3. I was living with my now mother-in-law in a house she had just purchased a few months before. We had all had various weird feelings or experiences in the house, but to really stick out, collectively, there were 3 dogs living in the house at the time. One evening, we are all sitting with our backs to the hallway, this is significant, watching a movie. All of a sudden my German Shepherd and my terrier both perk up their ears and start staring down the hallway behind where we are sitting. I mean, full attention. I notice and turn around, the light in the hall was off. It was dark, but of course, don't see anything. 5 minutes later, they're still staring and now growling. This time my wife and I turn around and we both watch as the light switch on the wall gets flipped on. Dogs went crazy and so did we. A few weeks later, same scenario, light is off, and we are watching a movie. My German Shepherd loved to play fetch, and we always had a million balls around to entertain her. This time, she's staring down the hallway and wagging her damn tail. This time, we all notice again and start to watch. I swear to God, a ball, single orange tennis ball, came rolling down the hallway towards her. We all went white. There were a few others, but Jesus, I hated that hallway. It never felt like a bad energy, but my feeble little brain was still scared nonetheless. One more story. My mum-in-law was having these dreams a few weeks after moving in about the house, catching on fire and burning to the ground with us all inside. Horrible. About 3 weeks after these dreams, we woke up one morning and distinctly smelled smoke coming from the house somewhere. Panicked, we all started searching and eventually came to the garage. On a rafter, we noticed a smoke coming out from around a fluorescent light fixture. At that moment I realized, my God, it's attached directly to this old dried out beam. The light was left on all night, and it was clearly burning the rafter ever so slightly. Lights are not supposed to be screwed onto a rafter like that. So we like to think our ghost hosts were looking out for all of us. After that, her dreams stopped. Thanks, Ghosty. Story 4. Not creepy, but definitely paranormal. I was about 17 and was in my bedroom crying my eyes out over something. Home could be difficult at times, and that evening I was really upset. I really needed someone to talk to, but the only phone in the house was downstairs where my parents were, so calling a friend wasn't an option. I didn't know what to do to deal with the crap I was trying to live with, and really felt that it couldn't go on for much longer. I remember thinking, please, someone, just help me. Not a prayer as such. I'm not really sure if that does any good. More sort of a mental scream into the void. There was definitely no one in the room with me. It was a tiny room, and I had my back to a chest of drawers. And then I felt a something on my left shoulder, as if someone was standing behind me and resting their hand on me. I could feel the weight of each individual finger, and the palm cupping my shoulder, and I could feel warmth from it. It didn't scare me, but it was enough to stop me crying. I guess the feeling lasted for a minute or so and then just stopped. I have no idea what it was, but it was enough to calm me down. I wish I could feel it again. Story 5. I shared a room with a guy in college who was a musician. He'd stay out late almost every night and come home around 3 or 4 in the morning. Our room was a straight shot through kitchen from the front door. One night, I woke up to the bedroom door opening and figured it was just my roommate coming home after a gig. I thought it was strange that he turned the light on when coming in. He knew I was a light sleeper and would normally use his phone's light to shine around the room. If he was looking for something while I was asleep, my bed was twin-sized, positioned against the wall connecting the bedroom to the kitchen. When he came in, I was facing the wall. I kept my eyes closed and pretended I was still asleep, because I didn't feel like having a conversation with a most likely drunken friend while I was still half asleep. I heard him go to his side of the room, opposite of my bed, and rustle around his desk and dresser looking for something. Sometimes he would grab some clothes for the next day and go stay at a buddy's house, so I wasn't concerned. Then I felt him start reaching under my bed. I kept a few things under there, but he would normally ask before straight up taking anything of mine. At that point, I was really confused and annoyed by all this. So I made it a point to passive-aggressively roll over on my other side and face the middle of the room in the direction from where he was reaching. So he knew. I was pissed that he was ruining my beauty sleep. Then I heard nothing, but I could feel he shot up from under the bed and was just standing there. I never opened my eyes, but I figured he would either apologize for waking me up or something, but he never said a word. He just stood there. After probably 2 minutes, with the light still on, I heard him leave the room and go to the kitchen. I opened my eyes after a couple more minutes, because he left the light on in the bedroom. He wasn't in the kitchen, but he had pulled a knife from the knife block and left it on the table. I checked around the house and couldn't find him, but quickly realized my Xbox, book bag, wallet, etc. was stolen. I called my roommate to see if he had been home, but he was miles away at a party. He still had his house keys and never gave them to anyone else prior. I must have accidentally left the door unlocked that evening, which was the one time someone decided to check the knob. Police never followed up with me after that night, so I doubt they ever caught the guy. I can't imagine what would have happened if I ever did open my eyes and see that guy standing there, or if I chased him out to the kitchen. Story 6. We lived in a house a few years back, and random things would just go missing. Then they'd turn up somewhere else. We never really thought hard on it because they were never expensive or important things. So because of this, none of us ever mentioned it to each other. Fast forward and Mum loses an earring. Not a huge deal, but it's a nice dangly pair she wears frequently. Maybe a month later, I come home and find it perfectly laid out in the middle of the ground at the end of a high-traffic hallway. It has 3 doors at the end. Take a photo and show Mum when she gets back. Give her back her earring, and we discuss the oddity. I mention that lately I've been misplacing random, inconsequential stuff like staplers. And she looks at me and she goes, "That's weird." Me too. Our housemate gets home and we mention it and he goes, "Oh man, so weird. My razor vanished for a while, and I found it back on my sink one day." So basically we're all convinced there was a friendly ghost attached to that house that just misplaced things to let us know they were present. Story 7. I was 15-ish and babysitting a neighbor girl down the road from my parents' house. The house was older, but I never thought it was creepy. They also had this awful rat terrier that would bark at everything. Worst dog ever. Once the girl went to bed, I sat in the living room and was watching TV. The dog started freaking out, but instead of barking at the door like normal, she started barking at the corner of the room. Then she would run to another room and bark, and come back to where I was, like she was following something. Finally, she stayed the kitchen, barking for a solid 2 minutes. Afraid that she was going to wake the girl up, I went into the kitchen to quiet her down. When I walked in, I froze and saw that every single cabinet door in the kitchen was open. All of them. I grabbed the dog and ran the living room. After she stopped barking, I went back into the kitchen and closed everything. Thankfully, the dad finally came home soon after. I refused to go back and my parents never believed me. I still get freaked out when I think about it. Story 8. I am from the Indian town of Bhubaneswar. I have never quite believed in supernatural or anything outside the purview of science. This creepy incident happened the time my grandmother died. Being a traditional family, we performed numerous rituals for her so-called heavenly abode to be pleasant. Most of these rituals don't make sense to me, nor do they do now. But I decided against questioning as the timing was gloomy and everyone was mourning. One of these rituals was the preservation of light inside a closed container. As part of the ritual, her kit, which included my father, are supposed to make a journey, taking her corpse from Bhubaneswar to the holy city of Puri, around 50 kilometers, where the Jagannath temple resides, and her sons are supposed to burn her there, perform the puja, and set the ashes on its path to the Bay of Bengal. Meanwhile, there'll be a container placed in our home in her room, where she used to live, which will be filled with sand up to a certain level and a lighted earthen lamp is supposed to be put, and the whole container will be covered completely. And the room is locked from outside for no one to enter the room till the sons arrive back to home and then unlock the room. Apparently, there are supposed to be shapes formed on the sand which will tell the path that she will take to the heaven. I was also told that when my grandfather died, the shape formed was that of a ladder, which was interpreted as him going to heaven in a ladder or steps. I of course thought all this was pure idiocy and didn't believe it. Cut to when my father and his brothers returned from the holy city of Puri, and the room was unlocked and the container was opened after that, and what I saw surprised and creeped me out. I could clearly see wheel shapes being formed on all the sides of the earthen lamp, called deep in my language. The wheel shapes were not barely visible. I even took a photo. They were clearly visible. Grandmother lighting setup pic. It still creeps me out how that is possible. Story 9. I don't smoke, and I don't have many friends who do, but I keep several ashtrays at home, just in case. So, one day, about a year ago, I was looking for some papers, and I found one of those ashtrays in one of the cupboards. It was completely empty and quite clean, BTW. I was pretty busy that day, so instead of putting the ashtray back in the cupboard, I just laid it on the kitchen table and went to do some repair work in the garage. I returned inside the house about an hour later, and the ashtray, still lying on the kitchen table, was filled with cigarette ash. No cigarette butts, just ash. I felt a faint scent of cigarette smoke in the house. Definitely not as strong as I would have expected, judging by the amount of ash. Like I said, the ashtray was definitely empty and clean when I found it and put it on the table. I took a kitchen knife and carefully searched the entire house. Nobody was there. I checked all the doors and windows. They were locked. Then I searched the house again, checking was any cash or valuables missing, but it was all there. I called all my friends, even non-smokers, and asked them, did they happen to drop by my house that day? They all said no. I also inspected locks for damage, but there didn't appear to be any. I changed locks, just in case, and had trouble sleeping for days afterwards. I actually stored the ash into the bag, and I still keep it in the drawer, just in case, though I doubt it will actually resolve or prove anything. The day after that bizarre incident, a murder took place in my neighborhood. A mentally disturbed girl with a history of drug abuse stabbed a convenience store cashier to death, following an argument over a pack of cigarettes. It is very likely unrelated, but sometimes I wonder. I don't keep spare keys in the yard, in front of the door or anything like that, in case someone is wondering. Story 10. Not sure if this counts as paranormal exactly, but it creeped me and my roommate out. So my roommate and I lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with a shared living space. I had just laid down in bed to go to sleep for the night, and my roommate was still up in the living room doing schoolwork. It was almost midnight. As I'm laying there on my phone, I get a call from a number I don't recognize. I answer it, expecting a telemarketer. Hello? A kind of high-pitched man's voice answers, "Hey, is this my name?" I should have hung up at this point. Yes, who is this? It's me, Derek. Remember? From high school? I was wondering if you wanted to talk. It's been forever. I went to an extremely small, rural high school, greater than 100, and there was no one in my graduating class, or any class, named Derek. I said, "I don't know who you are." And as I'm hanging up, I hear him say, "Wait, my name, wait." But I hung up anyway. The fact that this person knew my name is really weird, because, not to brag, but my name is really unique and I'm definitely the only person in my home county with that name. I went out into the living room to tell my roommate about it. As I'm telling her, she pulls up her phone and asks, "Was it this number?" She got a call from that same number at the same minute I did. She didn't answer the call and they left a voicemail. We listened to it, and it kind of sounded like someone breathing maybe, or just moving. And then distantly, at the end, it sounded like a group of people yelling, screaming, but it was distant. My roommate and I did go to the same high school, but we've changed numbers since we graduated, and there shouldn't have been anyone but close friends 1 to 6, people who would have both of our numbers. The area code was in our home state, but it was really far away from our hometown and we didn't know anyone there. Maybe I'm paranoid, but it really wigged us out. Story 11. As a child, I moved around a lot, army brat, and I insisted that every house I moved to was haunted. Nothing major ever happened, just weird noises, opening doors, things being in places that makes no sense. It wasn't until my second year at uni that I clocked on that I was haunted, not the houses, after my housemates suggested it. Anyway, last year I was on the way to my uni house from my job at a bar at about 3 a.m. To get into the house, you have to walk down a privately owned alleyway. Just as I reach the entrance to this alley, a man runs up behind me and spins me around. He's clearly had a bit too much to drink and starts trying to grab me, touch me up, and convince me to remove my t-shirt. Naturally, I'm very uncomfortable and scared. I remember that the window to the house had an alarm that went off if the window was hit. I figured if I could get down the alley and hit the window, my 2 male housemates would wake up and help. Only issue, every time I walked down the alley, he'd grab me again. After maybe 5 minutes of a struggle, the man hit me. Next thing you know, the alarm on the window goes off, waking up my housemates and scaring off the man. Next day, the police were called. We gave them access to the CCTV footage at either end of the alley. The man was caught on tape, but since most of the incident occurred in the alley, there was not enough evidence to charge. Later that day, my housemates and I decided to check the footage to see what caused the alarm to go off. There was nothing. No bird, cat, or any other animal. The alarm just went off. This had never happened before and didn't happen any time after either. I'm convinced it was my ghost. It used to freak me out, but I'm kinda glad it's around now. Story 12. March 2015. My father passed a month or so earlier. I wasn't sleeping well. I would be up later and later at night. My father used to always give me shit for staying up so late, because it's ruining my sleep schedule and affecting my work. Standard parenting stuff. It's about 2:30 a.m. and I'm watching YouTube on my PS4. Power in the house flickers. I check the window, no rain or wind or anything. I figured somebody hit a pole somewhere. Couple minutes later, power goes out for a second, comes right back on. Nothing was affected. Which is weird because when power goes out, electronics reset. Check the window again. Still nothing happening outside. A couple minutes later, power goes out for almost a whole minute. From the couch, I can see the street light outside is still lit, as well as the other houses on the street. Power comes back on, and everything is still as it was. Video continues where it left off. Clocks haven't reset, nothing. It's now 2:37 a.m. I audibly said okay and went to bed. Next morning I wake up for work. The clock on the oven says 11-something a.m. My phone says 7:23. It was around 11 when my father left the house the day he passed. Fast forward to January of this year, 3-year anniversary of my father's passing. I can't sleep. I'm upstairs at my new home, watching Netflix. Power flickers and goes out. I immediately said, okay, I'm going to bed. Power comes back on. Next morning, getting ready for work, oven clock says 11:41 a.m. Dad doesn't like when I stay up too late. Story 13. In the house I grew up in, it always felt like you were being watched. I'd see shadows out of the corner of my eye and dark mists that would dissolve when you looked straight at them. My older sister was always scared of the attic, especially. She would barricade the door when we were left home alone. I went in the attic quite often to get various things. It's where we kept large toy containers, old clothes and stuffed animals, and I just liked seeing what I could find. It always felt like I was being watched, though. One time I went up there, and as I reached the top of the stairs, I saw a large, translucent, alien-shaped white head looking at me from behind a box. I froze, terrified, and locked eyes with her for a few seconds, before it slowly lowered itself down to hide. I turned right back around and left, telling myself I had imagined it, but scared to go in the attic for years after that. I didn't tell anyone for years. My parents eventually sold the house and we moved, and I've never felt the same way anywhere else I've lived. Story 14. I used to have this reoccurring nightmare about this lizard man type monster who could see what I could see out of my eyes. So I'd run and hide and he didn't know where I was, but then as soon as I peeked to see if it was safe, he'd know where I was. So I'd have to leave that hiding spot and go find a new one. And then it would happen over and over and over again. A literal nightmare. Very Kafkaesque. But here is the real spooky part. I once mentioned the lizard man to my dad, and he got super white in the face, and his voice was all shaky, and he just said, "This dream took place at our house in East St. Paul. The one with the apartments right behind it." And I said yes. That's where I'd always go to hide. "How did you know that?" And he said, "Because I have the exact same dream." And I don't know if it was just the way he said it, or just the overall situation, or both. But I still get goosebumps thinking about it. It's quite chilling. Story 15. One afternoon in college, I came back from classes and decided to sit on the couch and have a snack. After that, I just passed out. I had a nightmare of some bloody-faced demonish thing screaming in my ear at the top of its lungs. Woke up and went about the rest of my day. My roommate comes back later that night and goes into his room as I'm sitting in the main living area. At some point, he lets out this random, startled scream, which leads to me running down the hall to see what's going on. He looks at me and goes, "I swear to God, someone with a bloody face just walked from your bedroom into the bathroom." I never told him about my nightmare I had earlier in the day. I didn't sleep for 2 days. Nothing ever happened again. Story 16. My grandfather passed away when I was 8, and my little brother was 2 or 3-ish. He had this big lazy boy chair in the living room that he always planted himself in. Everyone knew this chair was Grandpa's chair. Anyway, we went down to my grandparents' house in Florida for a long weekend to attend the funeral. ETC, we're all chatting the first night there in the living room, and my mum was sitting in the lazy boy chair. My little brother goes up to my mum and says Grandpa wants his chair back. My mum asks him where Grandpa is, thinking he probably didn't understand death, to which he responds, "He's right behind you." My mum bolted off that sofa immediately. Story 17. This one isn't the worst, but it's always left me with a bad feeling thinking back to it. I used to live out in the country, way back, almost to the end of a long dead-end road. There were only 2 houses that were actually lived in that far down, my dad's and the old lady at the very end of the road. There's my dad's house, and around it, kind of off to the side, were a bunch of old medium-sized barns. Sheds. I used to let my cat out sometimes and she would roam around the yard and come back up and paw at my window when she was ready to come in. One night I had done just that, but after a long while I got a little concerned. She usually only stayed out for an hour or 2 tops, but it had been way longer. I decided to go out and get her. I go out through the side door in the house and immediately felt off, like something was there. I needed to get my cat though, and if something was there, I chalked it up to a raccoon or other critter. I grabbed the maglite and set off for the barns, calling for my cat. I found her huddled up in one of the barns, and she did not want to leave. It was like she was terrified of something, and was very stiff when I picked her up. I hasn't taken but 2 or 3 steps when this light shoots across the sky directly over me, illuminating everything almost like lightning. It made this odd woo-woo sound as it passed. My cat freaked out and started growling and clawing at me, which she never does. One actually dropped her because of it, and she took off towards the house, as though she were running for her life. I did the same. I've never figured out what that was. I've read about comets and things like that, but nothing says anything about the odd noise I heard, or the reaction my cat had. It could have been something simple and explainable, but man did it freak me out at the time. Story 18. Let me start off by saying that I don't believe in ghosts yet. I'm still scared of ghosts, if that makes any sense whatsoever. At our old house, my cousin lived with us because he was a recovering druggie. He relapsed after a little. He would sleep in our basement, and he had an Xbox and everything down there. I always wanted to sleep down there, but he had college a lot, so I didn't want to bother him. After he moves out, he took his Xbox rip. I wanted to sleep down, but was too scared. My sister said she'd join me sleeping down there, so it was less creepy. This went on for about a week, until I felt comfortable down there. After a few days of me being alone down there, I wake up very terrified of what seemed like nothing. Suddenly, I start seeing about 10 or so black figures running towards me. They were coming from our staircase, so no way to nope out of there. I started screaming as loud as I possibly could. I think I temporarily blew out my voice for a few hours. I remember screaming from my mum, dad, sister, or anyone at all who would come to me. I was crying too. I woke up the next day and immediately ran upstairs and asked my mum if she heard me. My dad left for work already. She said that she didn't hear me at all. There are only 3 explanations I can think of. Nye was getting bamboozled by ghosts. 2, sleep paralysis. 3, I was up too late and my mind was tricking me. Story 19. Not sure if paranormal or not, but I have a weird warning system that functions without any obvious triggers. For example, once I hiked through the forest to some old castle on a hill. To get there, I needed to cross a bridge that goes over a 20-meter deep canyon. I've been there 1,000 times, as I used to live in the area. This particular time, I started to get a weird feeling as soon as I stepped into the forest. It got stronger and stronger until it was pure fear. I thought I must have eaten something wrong or so, because there was no reason whatsoever to be afraid. So I tried to ignore it and went on. Right before I stepped onto the bridge, that weird feeling acted up so wildly I almost turned back. Again, I convinced myself that I was being stupid and made it to the middle of the bridge. One has quite a nice view from that position into forest and the rock formations below. So as always, I stopped and looked down to the right side of the bridge. Then I turned to the left, but before I could look down, that feeling didn't let me. At that point, I really thought that I must go crazy, but still I obeyed. Didn't look down and made my way to the castle ruin complex that started right behind the bridge. Been there for 15 minutes when some police officers arrived. Started to scream at me to come down as I was climbing the old walls. Interrogated me who I was, what I did there, who I saw on my way to the castle, how long I have been there, and how come I didn't see the dead guy under the bridge on the left side. So apparently he jumped shortly before I arrived, and I guess they thought I was involved or a suicide buddy of him, and was about to jump from the ruin walls. Turns out I can sense dead people, or whatever. I had a couple experiences with that warning system. Weird. Story 20. I work at several attractions for the Big Mouse that has tourist destinations in Orlando and Anaheim. When I first started working for the Mouse, I learned that most of the buildings were haunted in one form or another. Generally, I take this stuff with a grain of salt. Show me the science, or prove it to me, then I'll believe. I've had 2 separate encounters with 2 ghosts in 2 different attractions, and let me tell you, I believe a hell of a lot more now. Experience 1. In a slow-moving journey through time. You come across a scene where a famous painter is lying on his back, painting the ceiling of a building. There is a ladder going up to that scene, and the rumor was that a maintenance guy had a heart attack during his shift one night and dropped at the base of the ladder. No one found him until the next morning, and he was already dead. It became a tradition upon closing the ride for the night to tell him good night, or else havoc would come down upon the ride the next day. Silly, I know, but we all played along. I never really believed in it. Everything seemed very circumstantial. On one particularly slow day, I was riding through the attraction when all of a sudden it stopped in that scene I mentioned earlier. Now, if you've ridden this ride, you'll know that it's basically a train car with 2 rows. Well, as far as I could see ahead of me, there was no one. As far as I could see behind me, there was no one. The ride system is pretty sophisticated. When someone hops out, there are pressure-sensitive mats on one side that trigger the ride to stop and show on our ride display screen exactly where it is. On the other side of the ride vehicle, there are photoelectric beams that also give the exact location of this intrusion, as we call them. Now, we stop this ride pretty often. Someone takes too long to get into the ride vehicle, stop it, and then start it back up again. Well, in this case, they started speaking over the intercom into the entire ride. That usually means someone is out of a vehicle somewhere on the ride. A few minutes into sitting there, I start to hear keys jingling, 2 sets headed in my direction. I'm completely alone, and here come my fellow mouse employees, looking rather concerned. Iridescent song, did you jump out? Of course, I hadn't, to which I told them. They look at each other and back at me, both looking from the opposite directions they've come from. Did you see anyone? I hadn't. It was just me. The mat and the I-beam were both triggered in this scene. We all sort of stare at each other and sort of whisper the ghost's name at each other. They leave, and within 5 minutes, we are moving again, but I never rode alone again. Experience 2. Another attraction I work at is a motion simulator that spins and creates G-forces to simulate spaceflight. When the attraction first opened, there was only one option. The story goes that a mother brought her child in to experience the attraction, and when the attraction had finished, the child was unresponsive. Emergency services were called, and it was later discovered during the child's autopsy that he had an undiagnosed heart condition. This much is true. There is a fellow mouse employee that was working on that day and remembers the story. Multiple other mouse employees have looked up the story, myself included. Since then, it's been said that the ghost of that little boy likes to hang around in the ride room where he died. There are multiple reports of hearing him laughing during opening procedures, of him calling out for his mom, of the sensors going off before the ride starts and upon checking the cameras. There being stuff in front of it that definitely wasn't there before, since we check all of the cameras before the ride starts. Again, I'm usually very skeptical about this sort of thing. One morning, I'm scheduled an opening shift, which doesn't normally happen due to my low seniority. I show up and go to open ride room number 3, which is the room where this little boy met his tragic end. During opening checks, there is one person in each of the 4 rooms, all completing the same tasks. Ride rooms 1 and 2 are connected by a small closet, and ride rooms 3 and 4 are similarly connected by a small closet. We usually don't chat in the mornings with the person opening the other ride room, since we are all trying to get through our checklist as quickly as possible. I get to the part where I'm about to run the ride and check for errors at the end of my checklist and go in to start closing up my vehicles. It gets pretty loud in there, to the point where, if we need to get someone's attention, we have to raise our voices. I start to check my ride vehicles and close the first 2 of 10. That's when I start gearing laughing, a little boy. At this point, I'm pretty sure it's one of the other openers playing a joke on me, so I move on. Go to check the next 2, they're good, so I close them. I hear the laughter again, closer and louder this time. I turn around to check over my shoulder, and there's a faint flicker of movement from the corner of my eye. So I go to check and see what it is. There's nothing. At this point, I'm spooked. I hurry and check the rest of my ride vehicles, close them up, and do a final check of my ride room before closing everything up and setting the ride to start. I hear the giggling again, turn around like last time, and there's a faint shimmer disappearing down the hallway. Of course I chase it to see what was there. Turns out to be nothing, again. So I go to the other ride room to see who was opening over there. A girl that I've worked with before quite a bit. She normally opens and tells me she's had similar experiences where it looks like someone is watching you, or just out of the corner of your eye and there's no one there, and that the laughing sometimes gets to be just downright creepy. Multiple people have encountered this little boy ghost at various times during the day, mostly under the conclusion that he's lonely. That is all for today. If you have enjoyed this video, do like and subscribe. I post once a week or more. You can also subscribe to my Patreon below to support me. Hope you have an absolutely amazing day, and hope you will check my other videos on screen.